Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to our beautiful space of Yatka 78, which is for the time being home of PQ Talks. My name is Barbara Přihodová, and I'm the curator of PQ Talks. And in case this is your first time with us, let me just say that PQ Talks are a platform for conversation and discussion around contemporary performance design and scenography. We have an ongoing program every day from the morning till night, pretty much, so please check the website and come see us. We've had some great discussions today. But right now, we're here for a very special occasion. We have a special guest. This is our first keynote speaker, Asiimwe Deborah Kawe. Let me read out her bio. Asiimwe Deborah Kawe is an award-winning playwright, producer, and performer. Currently, she is the producing of Tebere Arts Foundation and artistic director of the Kampala International Theatre Festival. Asiimwe has worked with the Sundance Institute Theatre Program, dividing her time between New York and East Africa, and she led the East Africa Initiative, a program that covered the countries of Burundi, Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Uganda for 6 years. Asiimwe received a diploma in music, dance, and drama, and BA in theater and performing arts from Makerere University in Kampala, Uganda, and M.F.A. in performing arts, an M.F.A. in writing for performance from the California Institute of the Arts. Her recent plays include Red Hills, Forgotten World, Cooking Oil, Appointment with God, Unentitled, Do They Know It's Christmas, and The Promised Land, to mention but a few. Her radio play, Will Smith Look Alike, won an award in the BBC World Service African Performance Playwriting Competition. Asiimwe has been a writing fellow at the Akademie Schloss Solitude in Stuttgart, Germany, a guest artist at Pomona College in California, USA, and the New York University in Abu Dhabi. She is currently one of the playwrights in residency at Residence Theater in Munich. And she's also one of the jury members here at Prague Quadrennial, so she's been really busy. And we're really lucky and privileged to have her tonight, so please join me in welcoming Asiimwe Deborah Kawe.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hello, and good evening. It is a great privilege for me to be here. I am enjoying the festival and the groundbreaking designs and innovations that are happening in the world of theater, design, and scenography. I really feel very fortunate to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to witness all the wonderful work in this space. And also, I want to thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be one of the keynote speakers. It's truly an honor. Just like Barbara said, my name is Asiimwe Deborah Kawe, and I am a playwright. I wear many hats. I am a playwright. I am the artistic director of the Kampala International Theatre Festival. I am one of the co-founding members of Tebere Arts Foundation, which is the organization that produces the Kampala International Theatre Festival. Currently, the Kampala International Theatre Festival is the only theatre festival in Uganda. And this year, we are turning 10 years. Thank you. Thank you. And for the last 9 years that I have been producing the festival, I have to say I have never seen the kind of designs and scenography that I have seen in this space. For some of the designs that I have seen where I know that the materials used would be next to impossible to get in Uganda, I started thinking to myself, now if such a show was to be invited to Kampala, how would our local self-taught designers reimagine it to design it, like where there's glass and plexiglass and water flowing and all these amazing things. How would we do them? Would we, for example, use transparent plastic bags to create an illusion of a plexiglass against some kind of material? So as you can imagine, my mind has been running wild with imagination. And I'm saying that because for the most part, when we receive performances to curate at the Kampala International Theatre Festival, some of them come with truly amazing, complex designs with materials that we may not be able to get in Kampala. And so we have to reimagine them with our designers. And so that has been running in my mind. The truth is, I am not a designer. I have never been, and there's a big possibility that I never will, at least in the conventional sense of the word. But there is a story about how I entered the place of theater. I consider myself as a storyteller, a story maker, and a space creator. And the way I entered the theater world, so it's not a wow story, you are free to check your cell phones. Because when I said there's a story to the way I entered the world of theater, it felt like, oh wow, this is going to be a great story. No, it's not. I feel like I was setting myself up. So I come to be in the world of theater and performance through my grandmother. At the age of 9, I started living with my grandmother, who lived a few meters away from my parents' house. And my grandmother was a wonderful storyteller. So every evening, my siblings and I would gather in her house, which kind of looked like this. I don't have the actual pictures of her house, but that is like a representation of how it looked like. And as on the living room part, that's where she would sit and tell us stories. When the weather was good and the moon was in the sky shining bright, we would go outside in the courtyard. Again, that's not her house, but the courtyard looked like that. And she would tell us stories. And the tradition at home was that in the subsequent nights, we would retell those stories that she had taught us. As you can see, you can imagine, there was nothing elaborate about the stage that my grandmother used to tell us stories. There were no lights, no costumes, no sound effects. It was just her and the story. No makeup, no projections. If the projections were to happen, they would be purely accidental. And that's because maybe she would want to demonstrate some of the animals in her stories that we had never seen, how they looked like. And so she would use her hands to create some kind of shadow puppets. Would put her hands against the lantern, and those shadows would reflect on the walls of her house. And recently, as I was putting this address together, I started making those, recalling what she used to make. I started making them with my 3-year-old son. And this is how they looked like. So that would be a dog. That would be an elephant. What do you think that is? Anyone who can guess? We were trying to create a dinosaur. That? Any good? Yeah, that was supposed to be a crocodile. Anyone? Yes, a giraffe. That was supposed to be a talking horse. I'm not sure how many of you have been to Uganda. How many? By show of hands. Oh, wonderful. Oh, wow. 2 people? Anyone else? Just 2? Oh, there's... Did you put up your hand to just make me feel better? Oh, you have? No? Okay. All right, so I realize I really have a lot of work to do to get all of you to Kampala. And I'm serious. I really would love to see many of you come. For those of you that have been to Uganda, you know that, and maybe have had an opportunity to work in theater or design or volunteer, you know that our kind of infrastructure is unique. It's very different from what many people are used to, for example, in these parts of the world or other parts of the world. So what I'm going to be talking about really is not our rare, but our reality. In Uganda, design and scenography is the last thing that many of us theater makers think about when we are putting together theater production. Because in many ways, it is still a privilege. Design is a privilege for several reasons that I will explain. And indeed, for me, it's whatever we do, it may look rare, but really it's not. It's because we work with what is available. And today I would like to talk to you about the history of theater in Uganda, why design for theater is still a privilege, and how my colleagues at the Kampala International Theatre Festival and myself are hoping to change that. Uganda's theater history tends to be told with the arrival of colonialists in the early 1860s. That kind of narrative presupposes that there was no theater before the colonialists arrived at the king's palace, the king of Uganda. And that's obviously very wrong and very untrue. What is true is that many people in present-day Uganda entertained themselves and preserved their culture through performance. But that was very different from the way the British entertained themselves and preserved their culture. All forms of entertainment of the nations that lived in different kingdoms that occupy present-day Uganda were orature and visual in nature. In addition, in all of the, at least African communities that I'm familiar with, there were no designated spaces for performance for the common man, except maybe in the palaces and king's courts. But for a regular person, any space could turn into a performance instantly. Like now, I could just start performing, or maybe I'm already performing. I'm going to give you just something small. And whenever I do a pause, all I would like for you to do is say, "Eh," okay? What are you gonna say? Eh. Okay. Don't worry, because I'm going to do it in a language that I don't think anyone understands here, but it will still be our performance together, okay? Tatana hanchintarkwe wa marakagaba ronda antena antororwa mtwachurki hinda kasinarko bekaba kunyeshaga majitaguzo mjoje katugwara iragwaniremu tutakangwa manzi tutakangwa manza bioreki yango nartomora tahanzi arakwa kwegamba nartereza tashwaza mugaruika shangu humize byembogo byembogo twahurza mgatano gwenzira kare shtwarengera nyankumbana nyananga twagiterente konungi arganja twajwambotsa rwanku twajigaraba kama bayo rwanimba rwanimba no mora kagabwe shembere kozina cyakabanga ba nabahicu muryanze just like that. No special lights, no special costume, but we have all been in a performance together. The only difference in the traditional sense of things is that this would not have been here. We would all be together in the same space, performing together. And after my act, another person would come on. And that was the kind of performance and traditional art forms that existed before the British came. So a performance could happen anywhere, and anyone could be a performer. No one needed to pay a fee to see a storyteller, or a puppeteer, or a poet, or a musician or a dancer do their thing. There were some few instances where performances were planned for and some designated individuals played special roles. Like, for example, in festivals, in rituals, in religious ceremonies. But still, the audience was never a passive observer. They were always active. In that sense, performance and ritual became the everyday connective tissue which communities used to create a space of belonging. Just like in the past few minutes, we kind of all created a space of belonging together. But with the arrival of European theater structures, the traditional art forms of performances were no longer considered part of the canon. In fact, some of those art forms were outlawed as pagan and satanic. Like, for example, something that I've just performed here would be considered satanic. Spaces like the proscenium arch stage, a box office, were introduced, and this introduced the separation of the performer and the audience. And with that, of course, came a fee for one to see a performance. The colonial reconstruction of society excluded traditional art forms and art spaces and artists from the mainstream. European structures of theater were introduced partly for the indigenous children to learn how to speak good English, and so other elements of theater like design were never really given any prominence, like the way writing in the English language or memorizing English texts were given. In 1959, the colonial government opened this space, which is the Uganda National Culture Center, and it also houses the National Theatre. This is one of the spaces where the Kampala International Theatre Festival takes place. That is the auditorium. We have several spaces where the festival has taken place, but this is like the real conventional space where the festival has taken place. And when we get submissions that have kind of complicated designs, this is usually where we curate them. It is a 367-seater, but originally it was designed only from the Uganda's parliament. The indigenous people were not allowed to occupy that space until 6 years after Uganda got its independence. So that is an image from one of the performances we curated. I think it was in 2015 from Belgium. It was a collaboration between artists in Belgium, in Iraq, and I think in France. So that's how the Uganda National Culture Center National Theatre looks like currently. These are different other spaces where we put work, where we stage work during the festival. That's the green room. Most of these spaces that are not the auditorium are rarely used for performance. So, but when we are at the National Theatre for the Kampala International Theatre Festival, we intend to take up every single space. That is some space that is next to the administrative offices. It's upstairs. We use that space. That's the same space, but from a different angle. That is another space where we host the festival. It's called Ndere Cultural Center. That is the amphitheater. It's outside. We also have performances there during the festival. That is the indoor auditorium. That is a performance from 2019 that was in the auditorium. That is from last year. Also, it's at the Ndere Center stage. It's a clown. The performer is from, I believe, Spain. That is another space where we curate the festival. That is the Uganda Museum. It has a similar history to the Uganda National Cultural Center, National Theatre. It was also built during the colonial times. So usually there's really one big hall at the Uganda Museum. So usually when we are going to put work there, we build a stage there. So that is an example of the stage. That is a performance from 2019 as well. It was performed at this stage. That is another performance. It was in a different space, but still at the Uganda Museum. That's the same performance that was there in 2019. This is another space that we use for the festival. It's called the Square, and we usually, it used to be a warehouse. Now there are offices. Most of the people who have offices there are visual artists or musicians. And so when we hire it for the Kampala International Theatre Festival, we tend to take the roof, so that's an open roof. Just on the other side, there's a small part that's covered. And what we do with that space usually is to kind of reconstruct it into a black box, and we put shows that can't be outdoor. So that's a performance that we created in that space that I was talking about that is kind of roofed, and we had kind of turned that space into a black box. Okay. So basically, those are the few spaces that we use at the Kampala International Theatre Festival. And all these spaces are spaces that are considered non-conventional, with the exception of the auditorium at the National Theatre. The rest of the spaces, we have to rework them so that they can function as performance spaces. And like I mentioned, most of the time, for the people that we have hosted at the festival, we have hosted people from different parts of the world. Like from Asia, we've hosted performances from China, from the Philippines. Europe, we have hosted performances from Germany, from Belgium, from France. We have hosted performances from the United States, from the UK, and most of these performances come with really heavy sets, complicated sets, where some of the materials, some of the designs, we are not able to meet them because of the kind of spaces that we have. And so what we do is to work with our local, all self-taught designers. We don't have design schools in Uganda, so all the people that we work with, and when I say all the people, don't think of tens or hundreds. I'm talking about at most 3. Yeah, they are, one is a visual artist. Actually, no, 2 are visual artists. The other one is an engineer. And we just work with them because they happen to love theater. And so when we get the kind of like tech writers that are super, super complicated, what we do is to see, if we really truly love the show, is to see how we can reimagine the set in a way that, 1, it is affordable for us, 2, that it is going to resonate with our audience, and can allow the artist to feel their performance in a different way from what they are used to, for example. Some artists are really gracious and they let us reimagine the sets and the designs. Others, as you can imagine, are not so impressed with our proposal. So, what in such a situation, much as we love the work, we just have to let it go because we are not able to meet the needs of the show. I want to think about the Kampala International Theatre Festival as a performance space that is inspired by ritual practices, but also that has characterized independence and resistance movements across the continent of Africa. The Kampala International Theatre Festival in the present day exists as a space where the story can live, be understood, and resonate with the audience. When we are thinking about curating work at the festival, we think about 4 things. We think about the story. What is the story doing? How is it relevant to what we are doing? How can it fit in the space that we have? So that is the second thing we think about. We think about the spaces that are available. We also think about our audience. Is this the kind of story that would resonate with the audience? And ultimately, the Kampala International Theatre Festival is a space for artists. We center the artist, and if the artist doesn't feel comfortable with whatever we are proposing, we respect that. But if they are ready and willing to work with us to reimagine the kind of settings and scenography they want, that is also affordable to us and we can use, then we walk that journey with them. I'm going to show you a few of the spaces that we have reimagined. So this is a show, it's called Evros, the Crossing River, from the UK. We hosted them, I believe, in 2018, and they had asked for a black box. That year, we were not going to be able to provide that. So what we did was to propose to them to do the show somewhere else that is very different from what you can imagine a black box to be. So the play is about a Syrian refugee girl who is trying to look for safety and ends up in the hands of a smuggler. So when we got this submission, we knew it would resonate with our audience because Uganda is one of the countries, I think, with the highest population of refugees. So we told them we couldn't find a black box. So what we did was to propose to them to have the show staged in a car gallery, a permanent exhibition car gallery at the Uganda Museum, a space that I showed you earlier on. This is an image of the same show in Kampala. So the background of the performance were cars that are exhibited. Now, we chose this space specifically for 2 reasons. The Uganda Museum was built by the British, by the colonialists. And we were trying to interrogate the relationship between the colonized and the colonized, in the sense that Europeans, for those that colonized many parts of the world, were coming into these places without, being invited, and in most cases, the histories that are playing out, including the refugee crisis, in many ways is a result of the colonial past. And the fact that Europe at that time was not, at least many countries in Europe were not willing and open to host refugees. So that kind of conversation and relationship was something that we were trying to interrogate. We were also interested in the background of cars that signifies movement and mobility. And so when we proposed that to them, they were really excited about our proposal and willing to perform in that space. There were no lights, absolutely no lights. What you're seeing is the natural light. So that is one of the examples of the kind of things that we do when we receive a submission that we are truly excited about. Recently, last year, we got a submission from a theater company in Germany called O-Team. In our understanding and depending on, in our, what we have and the resources available, it felt really tech heavy. And I would like for us to see a video of the show, the way it was done in Germany, and then I will show you some images of what we did with it. Thank you. Did you see that the kind of platform that was in some type of hall, a trap door anyway? So what the space that we were going to use did not have a trap door, that kind of setup. So what we did was instead to build this huge kind of platform and create space underneath that could act as a trapdoor, and that's how we were able to get to something close to what they really wanted. So these are images from the festival last year. As you see, there's nothing where that thing could disappear into. We just put it on top, but created space underneath where the actors could go and emerge from. And most of the things that were used, really, we didn't have them in Kampala. So the artists, they were so gracious, they traveled with most of the things. And the things they traveled with were many and heavy. So usually what happens in such a circumstance is we are honest with the artists and tell them what we can afford and what we cannot. And many, many of them are gracious to say, okay, we shall bring this. Earlier on, I mentioned that design and scenography in our part of the world is still a privilege. And these are the 3 reasons why it is a privilege. 1, by the time many of us put on a theater performance, we just want to tell our story, and as quickly as possible. Because for many theater makers who are tackling subjects that may not go well with the establishment, there's a high chance that such a performance is not going to be allowed to continue. So the best thing to do, instead of thinking about scenography, putting money in it, the best thing or the best thought that one has is to get on stage, tell a story, and go. The second thing, we do not have trained scenographers. There are no schools or universities in Uganda that teach scenography. All of the designers, like I mentioned, that we work with at the Kampala International Theatre Festival are self-taught visual artists who just love working with theatre people. There's one university in Uganda that kind of teaches theatre design, but it is taught as an academic paper. And actually the people who teach that paper, because I went to the same university, have never designed any show in their lives. And so as a result, if a student is interested in pursuing design or scenography as a career option or as an art form, there's no dedicated institution teaching that. And so when we started Tebere Arts Foundation, one of the things that we did was to create different programs that support artists who want to pursue other art forms that are not offered at the university. So for example, in 2021, we started a 1-year-long emerging artists program where artists who are either just fresh graduates from university or who are self-taught artists but are looking for skills, they can come and meet with mentors and be with us throughout 1 year to discover their individual artistic voice in different elements of theater, in acting, in playwriting, in directing, and recently in 2021 during the pandemic, we introduced scenography. For these very reasons that I have just shared with you. And we worked with a scenographer from Germany online. Frieda Schneider, maybe some of you know her. And so she has been mentoring our people. And last year we wanted to bring her to Uganda, but the grant we had applied for fell through, so we're not able to take her there. However, we continue to work with her. And if you're here and you are interested in offering mentorship to people, young people in Uganda who are completely interested in scenography, in set design, please find me. I would love to have a conversation with you. If you have a university, and at your university, such courses are offered, and there is an opportunity for them to get hands-on experience, I would love to have a conversation with you. Because I believe that scenography is important. Yes, our environment may not support the kind of designs that I have seen here, but there is a way to rethink and work with what we have. But we need people to get exposed. We need our young people to get exposed. And the exciting thing is, they are there, they are interested, just that there are no opportunities for them. I would love to have a conversation with you about that. One of the other things that we are trying to do, because, like I said, creating scenography is such a luxury or a privilege. Some of the things, for example, a program that we came up with during the pandemic for people to still, creatives to still feel like they are creating, and for our audiences to know that something is happening out there, was to come up with radio plays, writing for the year. And last year we did our first ever audio installation as part of the Kampala International Theatre Festival, which I believe was the very first audio installation in the country. So we got 7 plays by our emerging artists and 5 musicals from the Nairobi Musical Theatre Initiative. and we curated them as part of the Kampala International Theatre Festival. So those are some of our emerging artists with their mentors. That is Lulu Jamaima, who is a Ugandan writer and producer. And on this side is Eric Altofa from Switzerland, who is also one of the people we have put on our program to be our mentor. So here they were in a small studio that's within the community where we work, and they were rehearsing their audio plays. That is the kind of installation that we created. These were ideas between us staff of the Kampala International Theatre Festival and the writers. Those are the synopsises of the plays. Here is part of the audience listening to the plays. Now, at the end of each listening, we had people interview the people who had been listening to the plays and would record their experiences, either with a recorder or in front of a camera. And then others had the opportunity to write about how they felt, what they thought about the installation. Now, the way we did the installation was just us coming up with ideas. And ever since I got here, I have been thinking a lot about what it would mean if we had a professional designer or a professional scenographer to design for us that kind of installation. This year, in November, we're going to have another audio installation as part of the Kampala International Theatre Festival. If you are interested and you would like to work in a different environment, different experience, and design an audio installation, hey. Right? You know what I'm about to say. But yeah, I would love to have a conversation with you. And I want to say something about the audio installation and last year's experience with the Kampala International Theatre Festival. A week to the opening of the festival, we received a letter from the Media Council, which is like a board that regulates things to be seen by the public, and we were told that we could not have the festival. This was a week to the festival. They asked for ridiculous things, including us flying in the international artists ahead of time so that they can perform before the censorship board and be told whether their plays would be accepted as part of the festival or not. Another thing they asked for was to see the performances of the radio plays. And we're trying to explain to them that radio plays are recorded in studios. So if you want to come and listen and see how they are being recorded, you're more than welcome to go to the studio. They said, no, we want them to be performed. But anyway, long story short, eventually the festival was allowed to happen 18 hours to the opening. And for the audio installation, our emerging artists and other people had worked so hard to put together was allowed to happen for just one day. So again, it goes back to what I was talking about, that sometimes designing and thinking about scenography really becomes a privilege in some parts of the world. Moving forward, we are also thinking about doing work in communities as opposed to asking people to come to us. We go to them and perform work with them. And another thing that I've been thinking about while here is what would it mean to design a show? And based on so many exhibitions that I have seen, what would it mean to design a show that is happening within community and with the community? I'll show you just quick pictures of some of our pilot projects working with the community, because there is always a conversation after. And so I've been thinking a lot about working with communities, but also having a scenographer or set designer to help us set up and give work with us. What we are trying to do is to create a space in between, a space between the sophisticated kind of work and the simplistic kind of work, to find that space in between. And maybe that is what we shall call our rare. And as I end, allow me to say that if you are from my part of the world, you don't just pick up a bag and rush to the airport and go to the country where you have been invited to go. No, there's a process. It might take a whole year to prepare for such a trip. There's the visa application process. You may apply and maybe be given an appointment, but that's not guaranteed that you shall get the visa. When you get the visa, it's no guarantee that when you get to your port of entry, you shall be allowed to enter the country of your destination and be able to carry out the activities that you have been invited to carry out. So I want to thank PQ for getting me here. Thank you, thank you, thank you for working with me, for all the letters you wrote. I appreciate you. And you did not only bring me, you brought a journalist from Uganda. That's huge. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Asiimwe, for this wonderful, wonderful presentation, so rich. I really love the way you guys work at the festival. I think the idea to challenging the artists to find the new spaces where to put their work is fascinating, and in my mind, it's so scenographic, right? But I also appreciate the reminder that design is a privilege. It's something that I'm carrying with myself. And thank you for the invitation here for our audiences to collaborate.
Yes, everyone.
That's a challenge for everyone here. Yeah. Okay. I'm sure we have questions. So if you have a question for Asiimwe, please raise your hand. And our wonderful volunteers will get to you. So we have one up there, Pavel. Thank you, Pavel.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you very much, Asiimwe, for the wonderful talk. I really loved it. I have a question. You've been incredibly generous about the Kampala Theatre Festival, International Theatre Festival. I would like to ask about your work as a playwright who's working in Uganda, but also across the world. Tell us about your stories.
Thank you so much. Yes, I realized that I actually didn't say much about my own work. I guess that, I don't know, yeah, the festival is always on my mind. So I write stories that, my work is mainly socio-political. I write stories that resonate with me in terms of what's happening in my own country, but also, I think generally my thesis is the relationship between developing countries, or the so-called developing countries, and the so-called developed ones. I write about things like, for example, I talked about the visa. I write about migration movement. I write about foreign aid. I write about, I guess, yeah, relationships between the Western world and the world that is referred to as developing world. Thank you.
Thank you. Asiimwe, do we have more questions? Yes, there is.
Hi. Oh, is she working? She is. I wanted to ask about the very difficult process that it would take with the government, and I was wondering, with your work here now on this international stage, do you think that it could make headway some sort of way? What do you think about the trajectory, I suppose, that the relationship with the government in Uganda, how that's heading?
Thank you. I think with the kind of leadership, or I don't know whether I should call it leadership, it's always difficult to know what's going to happen. It's really always difficult to know. But I have never been in kind of trouble personally for my writing. Yeah, for the Kampala International Theatre Festival, I was. But also, what I always do in my work is to find ways of collaborating with people who are from elsewhere, and that always helps. Because the kind of governments like mine, there is still a fear of being embarrassed internationally. So I'm always intentional like that I find ways to collaborate with people who are from elsewhere. And so I'll give you an example that is not related to my work per se, but is related to the Kampala International Theatre Festival. At the opening of the festival, the members of the Media Council were present to see what was going to happen, and there was a rumor that maybe they might stop the opening performance. But what we had done was to invite an ambassador of some country that I won't mention, and his presence there helped a lot. My team and I had spotted plainclothes policemen at the Uganda National Culture Center where the play was opening. And so some of our team members started to panic. But when that ambassador arrived, some of them disappeared in thin air. So, yeah, so sometimes one has to do that to be able to protect the people they are working with.
Thank you. Do we have more questions? Yes, there is.
Yes, hello, thank you for coming. What do you do about funding? Do you have funders or private organizations that help? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, over 98% of the money that we use for the Kampala International Theatre Festival comes from Europe and the United States. And then the rest of the small percentage, maybe 2%, comes from in-kind support locally. Like I showed a space called Ndere Cultural Center. The owner, who is Ugandan, has been very, very gracious to us and gives us space really like almost at no cost. And yeah, so our funding, which of course raises a big question of sustainability, our funding comes from Europe, the United States, yeah. But also what we have been doing, because we are consciously thinking about sustainability, what we've been doing is to partner with other festivals like Bayimba Culture Festival, and another festival that hasn't been in operation since the pandemic called Writivism, is to do some kind of barter trade. So we do, our team as the Kampala International Theatre Festival volunteer, do a lot of work that could have cost them money, and then when it's our time to run the festival, their team also comes and works with us. So that's how we try to to run the festival, and most of the Ugandan support that we get is in kind.
Thank you. Do we have more questions? Yes, thank you.
Hi, I'm a theater maker from South Korea, and thank you so much for the talk. I find myself very privileged to travel all the way here and to hear your story. Also Korea has like the history of being colonized by Japan, and from like our colonized history, our theater history got kind of shifted. We had our traditional theater, but since the colonization and kind of Western influence came in, and also our theater education now became very Western oriented. We get to work, before that we didn't have like kind of proscenium stage, and black box theater was very foreign concept, but now that became kind of standard of theater education and theater industry in Korea. And my question is like, because I find there is kind of hierarchy coming with like capitalism, like Western theater, Broadway theater becomes something really cool, big, what people all admire, the audience get to follow. And even inside like theater makers, there is like a hierarchy of people admiring. Yeah, scenography is definitely privileged, like who can work in like a big proscenium theater, like becomes a very privileged thing, I think. And I wonder if you have any experience of communicating that inside like the other artists about how we can reverse the conversation of those like hierarchy and speak about our own cultural roots and how to decolonize theater industry in general together.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your question, and it's something that my colleagues and I constantly think about. Yes, there's a hierarchy in Uganda as well. So for example, there's this belief that, you know, if someone has gone to school, studied theater, maybe they even write in English, that if they have written a play, regardless of its style or whatever, the right place for it is, for example, the National Theatre. But one of the things we are trying to do now is to really go into communities, to people who still practice traditional art forms, and work so hard so that we can bring them into the mainstream. So the last images that I showed, that is, this year we started a pilot project where we are intentionally and actively going into communities, to people who have different skill sets of art forms, and work with them so that we can bring them into the fold, and so that they are recognized as part of the mainstream, not high art. It is high art in its own right, but because of the things that you're describing and because of the experiences as sharing, it has been really put on the side, and I think it's a responsibility to you and me and everyone else who feels that way to create systems so that the traditional performers and traditional art forms, indigenous art forms, are brought to the mainstream. And we can only do that not by taking to them what our performances are or inviting them to see our performances, but by creating together. Again, it is what we constantly think about, the space in between, finding the space in between.
Thank you. Yes, please go ahead.
Thanks for telling us your stories. And you previously mentioned how theater has worked as a tool during the whole process of colonization. And I wanted to know today how you are working with language or languages in this process of bringing the culture to the mainstream or cultures. So what's the role of language and which languages are performed on the stages there?
Thank you. That's a very important question. We have, as Tebere Arts Foundation, we have different programs. We have an emerging artists program, a playwrights residency, and the Kampala International Theatre Festival. And previously, the submissions we have been receiving were all in the English language. And 2 years ago, we started encouraging people to submit to us in languages they are comfortable in. Languages, as we say, the language you dream in. What is the language that you dream in, that you know you can create in? So last year, one of our emerging artists that graduated recently spoke Luganda. In fact, doesn't speak English. And so what we do is to be intentional, make sure that the mentors we are going to assign this individual to is someone who is very fluent in Luganda. And this year, the submissions we have received, people speak all sorts of languages. There are so many languages in Uganda. So unfortunately, for some where we may not be able to get mentors who speak that language and artists, we will have to find other ways of supporting them. But yes, it is a question that we are constantly grappling with. When we go to communities, we don't speak English because we speak the language that the community speaks. Otherwise, then what are we doing?
Thank you. Do we have some more questions? Yeah, the gentleman.
I'm from central the United States, and the oppressed culture tends to be our First Nations people. But the problem with restoring some of their native art forms is that a lot of it was religion to their communities, so it wasn't meant for a Western observer. So is there a way that you work to support those artists whose art isn't meant for an outside observer?
Wow, that's a very important question. In a situation we haven't encountered that kind of example you have shared, but I am aware that in some of the rituals that made a performance happen in the religious settings, some were never allowed to be observed, except for the people upon which the ritual was meant for. So in such a situation, if really they need any kind of support in terms of continuing their art form or bringing the art form to the mainstream, it's a conversation. We have to have a conversation with them. So I think the same would apply to your situation in Central America. How do they feel about being observed, or how do they feel about someone going in and supporting them? Or can you take someone out and give them the skills that then they can go back to their community and support them? But I think ultimately it's important to respect them and their needs. And that way is a form of support.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, we have a question there, thank you.
Hello, I'm Luz from Mexico. I just was wondering, what is the impact that the festival has culturally or socially in Uganda?
Sorry, say that again.
I want to know what is the impact that you notice after the festival is done? Like, what does it do to the community to have this festival?
I think for me, it's about creating a platform.
But socially, does it has like an extra cultural impact?
A cultural impact? Yeah, people's stories that are never seen by the public are being seen. And also, sometimes when one is doing work, it's never clear whether there's an impact being felt or whether there's anything that's being done to change the landscape. But I think for me, when these guys, the media council came after us, that's when I was like, oh, wait, looks like there's something we are doing that we may not even be aware of, because otherwise why would they want to come after a small festival like ours when they are not, you know, don't seem to be after other theater performances. So I may not be too concretely say this is happening. I think it's always a process, and I may never know until maybe 20, 30 years from now.
Actually, I think I'm gonna follow up on that. I wonder about myself, about your audiences. Who are your audiences? Where I am, sometimes it's difficult to bring people to theater, and you have to do a lot of community outreach and work with them. So how is it for you in your work in the festival?
Yeah, mainly our audience is young people. Yeah, university students, fellow artists, journalists, and now, like, communities around where our office is really are paying attention and interested in what we are doing.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, we have a question at the, like, in the middle. Yeah, well, thank you.
Thank you. Hello, thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. My name is Mikey. Something I think this festival has spoken a lot about is this world of, now that we're trying to take the next step from COVID and the pandemic, even though in some ways we're not in some ways, and we're still in the midst of this moment of our lives. But so much of this festival has been about trying to understand what our lives are like now. I'm just curious, what have you seen from Ugandan playwrights and artists? What are the messages that are coming out since 2020 from your fellow artists? What are the themes, the stories, the ideas? I'm just a bit curious about that.
Thank you. I have been asked this kind of a similar question before, and I feel like some parts of the world have gone through so much that, yes, COVID affected them, but it was like another thing on top of another thing on top of another thing. So in terms of the writing that people, or the work of theater or other performances that people are creating, I don't think it's any different from what they have always created. It's resistance. It is projecting into the future hope. It is, calling for support from other parts of the world. So it's not, yes, COVID happened, but it was like another layer of the so many things that were already happening.
So maybe this is a good time for us to slowly wrap up and thank again Asiimwe for your wonderful presentation, and the conversations can continue beyond this room. Thank you so much.